It says recording.
Yep, great. Okay, so hello everybody and welcome to the third Heatherleys online event following my in-conversation with Sadie Lee 2 weeks ago and Rosalind Davis's professional development talk last week. Thank you to everyone who is joining us and thank you to Hero and Heatherleys for hosting, and we hope you're all sitting comfortably at home. So before we get started, I just need to remind you that this is being recorded, as you've just witnessed, and it will be put up later on the Heatherleys School website and also on their YouTube. So I'm Anna McNay, a writer, editor and curator, and today I have the great pleasure to be talking to Susie Hamilton, firstly about her practice in general, and then we'll get on to her most recent and current series depicting doctors and nurses from COVID-19 wards. So I don't want to spend all too long on introductions because we've got so many wonderful images to get through, and Susie can obviously speak better for herself than I can, but I do want to give a brief overview of some of her key themes and also career stages, just for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar with her work. So Susie's work is primarily concerned with the human condition and the solitary existence of individuals. Her paintings condense figures into a couple of suggestive brushstrokes stranded in darkness or light. Even when clustered together, they evoke a pang of loneliness. They offer snapshots, capturing that sense of isolation and existential angst that we have all felt during moments of despair. Figures are often reduced to mere blots and specks of paint. Some appear to effervesce at their edges, merging with the background in a smear. Metamorphosis, as you'll hear, is central to all of her work, and it includes metamorphosis into abstraction through which an identifiable image is turned into something unnamed and mysterious. Susie studied at both sorry, my words are not coming out right today, at both St Martin's School of Art, as it then was, and also at the Byam Shaw School of Art, where she was awarded the Graham Hamilton Drawing Prize. She has a degree in English literature from Birkbeck and a PhD on negation, play and identity in Shakespeare. Susie has had solo exhibitions both in the UK and around the world, including Norway and Russia. She's also been included in group shows as far afield as Romania and China. Her works are held in the collection of the Imperial College Healthcare Art Collection, the Deutsche Bank, House of St Barnabas, St Paul's Cathedral, the Prizeman Seabrook Collection of 21st Century British Painting, the Groucho Club, Bernard Jacobson Gallery, and Damien Hirst's Mundane Collection. And she is represented by Paul Stolpe Gallery. So the plan, as usual, is that Susie and I are going to talk for probably approximately 50, maybe 55 minutes, and I'll be sharing slides as we go. And there are so many images that I couldn't make the call on which ones to show and which ones not to. So I've grouped them together, as you'll see on the slides. So some of them are just details, but it's largely just to give an overview of her work. And yeah, then at the end, we're going to open up to questions, but I've muted you all just to keep the sound quality as good as possible. So I would ask, I don't know, I'm hoping everyone's fairly familiar with Zoom by now, but in the middle bottom of your screens, you should have a little chat box. And you should be able to type into that. So if you can type questions in either at the end, or if you think you're going to forget them as we go along, that's fine too. And then I'll come to those and read them out, and we'll hopefully get through as many as possible. I'm just going to take my watch off so I can actually keep an eye on the time, sorry. Okay, so let's get started. Susie, so as an English graduate, as I've mentioned, and you're also married to a playwright, so your work is unsurprisingly greatly influenced by literature. Oh, somebody's not muted. Can I just ask everybody to mute themselves? Okay, I thought everybody was muted as they came in, but okay. Can you all just check you're muted, just for sound quality? Right, sorry, where was I? So you're, yeah, greatly influenced by literature, in particular by the first person in lyric poetry and also novels and also scripture. So the speaker becomes a wanderer in the wilderness, and your PhD, as I've mentioned, is on metamorphosis and identity in Shakespeare. So we've got here 2 images from a series of Caliban in the desert, so from The Tempest. what is it? I mean, this is really key to your work. What is it that draws you to the idea of metamorphosis?
Well, I think two things mainly, a sense of fear and a sense of mystery. The fear goes back to when I was a child, and I'd be terrified if someone put on a hat or sunglasses, or even worse, came out of the sea with wet hair. And then, of course, you know, with fairy stories, not just change itself, but change from something nice to something nasty, someone becoming a witch or something. That alarmed me. But then, as I got older, it was more a sense of mystery, that something that I knew and was familiar with could turn into something that I was unfamiliar with. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at paintings I loved at St. Martin's, for example, by Bacon or Kittai, I loved the way something that was a recognizable shoe or a face would turn into this shape or this tangle of lines. And if it had just been an abstract painting of shapes or just a figurative painting of faces, that wouldn't have thrilled me so much. It was this mysterious transformation of something known towards something unknown.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So another great influence, literary influence, is of course T.S. Eliot, so in particular The Wasteland. And you had an exhibition a few years back in Margate specifically relating to this, and it later went on to be shown at Paul Stolper Gallery. Obviously Eliot is a huge influence on so many painters, but what is it about him that most attracts you?
Well, when I first read The Wasteland and also Proof Rock, this was when I was a teenager, there was a fascination with his social unease, the fact that Proof Rock couldn't speak in these elegant soirees that he had to take part in. And this also occurs in The Wasteland. But then in The Wasteland, I was very thrilled with the theme of mess. I'm getting a lot of images flashing one after the other.
Sorry, I think we carry on.
I'm just checking I haven't done something wrong.
No, it's me.
Okay. In The Wasteland, these incredibly shocking and squalid scenes of brothels and dirty bedsits and dirty hands and ears and everything. But it wasn't just that they were realistically squalid. He, rather like Baudelaire, who influenced him, makes these dirty things into kind of fantastical, nightmarish images, so that a bat is not just a bat, it's a bat with a baby face in the violet light. And then the mess that thrilled me so much was also belonged to the structure of the poem, in the sense that a scene in a bedsit, for example, will veer quite oddly down into Hades, you know, the Greek underworld, or Margate will suddenly become Alexandria with St. Augustine. And so The Wasteland was not just kind of urban realism, it was this great cavern of possibilities, these strange nightmarish images from mythology, and these epic journeys across the world and back in time and so on. And I found all this very absorbing and endless in its fascination.
Mm-hmm. So you also published a book with The Wind in the Trees called On Margate Sands, which I think includes the images from that exhibition. It's got an essay by Charlotte Mullins as well, which is worth reading. But what does the bringing together of poetry and imagery add one to the other for you?
I think I like, as I think you said in your introduction, I like to paint in a very abbreviated and succinct way, if possible, to make things reduced to their essentials, if possible, and to distill them. And the intensity of poetic language does that as well. The other thing I think about poetic language is the Russian formalist said it was language made strange. It's not like prose. I mean, some poetry is prosaic, but a lot of poetry is very heightened and strange language. And part of its oddness is the heavy use of metaphor. And metaphor, as you would imagine, is to do with metamorphosis. So it takes us back to metamorphosis. And I was thinking the other day of Sylvia Plath's poem called Metaphors, in which she talks about being pregnant, and she's a melon strolling on two tendrils. So if you read it, you know, she's she morphs from being a pregnant woman into this odd Bosch-like sphere on these tiny Dali-esque legs. So I think the compression of poetry, the strangeness, and then the metamorphosis through metaphor.
Yeah.
All these things kind of make poetry and painting kind of cohere for me.
Absolutely. I'm not going to dwell on these, but do stop me if you want to talk about any of them. I've got images from quite a few more of your works inspired by literature, which I was just going to kind of flash through to give people a bit more of a taste. So these are from The Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah.
Also stop me if I get it wrong.
No.
These are from Andrew Marvell's pastoral poetry. And then, of course, we have to come back later to Ovid himself, the master of the metamorphosis, but we will do that properly in a little while. But from these solitary voices in literature and the figures, you became interested in isolated figures more generally in real life as well. So wandering through urban or natural wildernesses. So you work a lot in series, and this is from a series of shoppers in malls and supermarkets. So I guess what I want to ask at this point is, how do you create these and also your other compositions? Because clearly some of the more literary ones are very much drawn purely from the imagination, but these could almost, I mean, they look quite observational. Do you actually go and sit and people watch in supermarkets, or how?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I mean, I hung around all the supermarkets in East London where we live, and then I went. There was a precinct outside Poplar in East London, which was very fertile ground for me. And then I'd go into the supermarket and I'd clip the sketchbook to that place where the shopping list should be. Draw, but and I did take photographs, but I was told in a Tesco that you weren't allowed to, so I had to get out. One of the reasons some of these women, or these women here, are seen from behind is because I didn't want them to know I was drawing them. So often I'd follow them up and down the aisles, quickly drawing from behind them. And I mean, they're quite purposeful as well as quite pathetic in a way. They're sort of sad, but also resilient and sturdy as they're going in search of shopping.
Yeah, I love these figures in particular, actually.
Thank you.
Do you ever work from photographs, or is it always from sketches?
I do. Yeah, no, I do a lot, and particularly now with the COVID pictures, but throughout, I mean, I have done a lot of shoppers from photographs, but I like to reinforce my photographic imagery with imagery from with observation from life. So I tend to do a lot of painting from life. Well, I used to before lockdown, and I'd sit on the street or with my watercolor box abroad or in London, and the shoppers were done, a lot of them, you know, directly on the street.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a few more sets of solitary figures. Again, stop me if you want to say anything about these series, but so these were from figures in winter landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have Moroccans in deserts, so from one extreme to the other in terms of temperature. Mm-hmm. Astronauts out in space. Explorers in the Arctic. We can come back to some of these later if we want, and also a cowboy here in a canyon. So do you work on one series at a time, as you are now with the COVID-19 series, or do you do you finish one series, move on to the next? How does it go?
Yes, I do. I do tend to sort of get obsessed with one series and go at it until I feel I've finished it. But then I sometimes find I got more to say and come back to it in a different way. I mean, rather like a spiral, I come back around to it, but it takes on perhaps a different form. Like I did a series of dining room pictures, which were a lot of messy figures seen from a distance. But then I did some close-up ones I wanted to concentrate on faces more in candlelight, because T.S. Eliot has these dining room scenes with candelabra. Actually, no, they're not dining room scenes, they're scenes with candelabras, and I wanted to do those. So yeah, I mean, I revisit a subject
Yeah, and I think we've got a couple of your dining room scenes coming up later because they do relate also to the COVID series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What have we got coming up next? Yes, so your figures are quite often in quite extreme situations, so particularly extremes of light and dark. So here against really quite dazzlingly white backgrounds, and then here with bright light, dark shadows. So how do you use light both metaphorically and also technically in your paintings?
Well, light, particularly in the first lot you showed, tends for me to be quite an aggressive, violent, threatening thing. I mean, because I've worked in very, very hot countries, I'm not that keen on such heat, and I suffer from migraines, and it gives me headaches. And then the other thing about light I find is that it splits and destroys forms. So I've done a lot of work in which figures are metamorphosed through bright light. And Paul and I did a catalogue called Riddled with Light, which is a quote from W.B. Yeats. And in the catalogue and in a show that went with it, figures are transformed through very bright light. So it shatters and turns them into something else and blurs their edges. And that's one kind of light I use, which is in the central figure here, where the figure is kind of whisked away. He's melting, his back is melting in the heat. But the other kind of light, perhaps exemplified by the one on the left, is light which is more stark and dead-ended, if you like, where outlines and shadows make for this hard-edged, desolate quality. I think I was much influenced by the surrealists, who have a lot of figures and shadows in bright sunlight, and also a sense of sunlight and melancholy, which is something that I deal with, which is perhaps slightly eccentric. But the figure with a shadow is very important to me, and I discovered a new word recently, a gnomon, which is the point of a sundial casting a shadow. So my figure is a bit like a gnomon with its shadow, and I thought that the melancholy of De Chirico or Dali and their figures with shadows is, I think, to do with the figure and shadow sensing a certain limitation, so that the figure is inscribed not just in space, but in time through the angle of the sun at a particular point in space and a particular hour of the day. And even though the figure may move somewhere else, move on in time somewhere else, it's always aware of this limitation and finitude or finitude. And that it's chosen to be at this particular place at this particular time, but it's excluded other choices. So it's kind of fear of missing out big time. It's trapped in one place at one time with a certain kind of melancholy at its stasis, at being so static.
Yeah.
So it's kind of light as an energizing, shattering force, and light as rather a limiting, hard-edged quality, I think, in all these pictures.
It's interesting that it's a sort of almost a negative force in places, because normally light is seen, I guess, as more positive. But
yeah, I mean, I can see it in an ecstatic way. I've done some jungles with monkeys and light blazing out, but when it comes to the figure, I tend to put my figures in quite difficult places where they're assaulted or attacked, and light is one of the elements that attacks them. And then you talked about the technical aspects of light and dark. I mean, I enjoy the dramatic contrast of extreme light and extreme dark. And I tend to kind of turn up the dark, turn up the light, make them extreme. And I find that visually exciting, but also I find it exciting psychologically to show my little figures pinned between these extremes, and perhaps from the extremes of both. Yeah. And then you've got a beach down there, and that I quite like again, the extremes of dark and light, and the black sky full of, we can't see it here, but it's full of these slightly menacing cells.
Yeah, again, I think we might have that coming up later, because I think
I'll talk about that later.
Yeah. It might be a good point to ask you a bit about your actual media and process. So are these using acrylic paint?
Yes. Mm-hmm. I tend to use, or actually I think the clown is oil, but I tend to use acrylic because I like the fact that it dries quickly and I can work in layers. Mm-hmm. And I can throw veils of light or some sort of tone, a thin veil of tone over figures to show them mutating or metamorphosing. But I also use watercolor, as I said, because of working from life, you know, on the street. And we went to Fez, and I worked outside a mosque on the street, and I work on Berck-Plage in France quite a lot. So it's, yeah, basically acrylic and watercolor.
Yeah, but occasionally oil as well. Occasionally
oil, yeah, but I find oil very difficult because if you can get it done in one, it's fine. But I'm so impatient. I don't like waiting for the first layer to dry, and then you have to work when it's dry on the second layer, and I just can't be bothered. I want to get on, you know.
So yeah, talking about working with acrylic, if I can reveal a secret, although it's not really a secret because I know I've written about it before and I'm sure other people have, but you do things such as mix fairy liquid into the acrylic, so that I think you've called it blooms out, like you can see here sort of, and also use very watered down acrylic so that it seeps out over the boundaries of the figures, and like we mentioned in the introduction, creates this kind of effervescent smear. You've described these methods as iconoclastic, but can you say a bit more about how you develop them and how you work with them and why? These perhaps show it better.
Sorry, the phone rang, which it shouldn't have done. Iconoclastic, yes, because that's not to do with, you know, destroying venerated images, it's destroying my own images. I tend to like to make figures that are made more vulnerable by assaulting them, if you like. For instance, these explorers are bombarded with white paint, i.e. snow, as they struggle through the Arctic or Antarctic. And then the other two, either side of those, from a sequence on Andrew Marvell's poetry. They're to do with a figure, a sorrowful figure. And the figure is kind of, the emotion within the figure is expressed through the paint bursting the boundaries of and the contours of the man, the one on the left. And similarly, the one on the right. And it's also as if, as I said about metamorphosis, it's as if I'm enjoying the turning of a figurative and recognizable thing into something semi-figurative or abstract and unnameable. So I quite like the mystery of that. So the use of mess and iconoclasm is in the service of this metamorphosis, taking the figure away from familiar representation. And it's also in the service of making the figure more vulnerable because they're already in rather desolate spots. Mm-hmm. But the snow or the mist or the light tend to attack or challenge or deface the image and the figure itself.
Yeah. Okay, I said we'd come back to Ovid, and you keep bringing up metamorphosis, and obviously then he's the key guy, if you were. So here you've got, is it Kerberos on the left and Bacchante on the right?
Yes, Bacchante, yes.
And then you can tell me who these all are. I think it's Hermaphroditus in the centre.
Yes, it was a Narcissus with his reflection in the water on the left. Either Hermaphroditus or Tiresias in the middle. And then, I mean, out of Ovid, I just did these rather strange shapes and figures that were unlabeled, really, unidentified, but they were figures, as it were, from Ovid turning into something in a wood, because he has these rather strange goings on in forests and woods. And I like the combination of beautiful landscapes in Ovid, really gorgeous landscapes of Mediterranean light, sunlight, with these very gory, tragic things happening to his characters, and very shocking too. A lot of people don't read Ovid now because he's just so shocking and un-PC as well. The main thing, I think, well, two things that appealed to me were, the main thing was the vulnerability, once again, of the figures at the hands of nature and supernature, of the gods. You know, a figure will offend a god, and the god will turn in her into something else, just like that. And so they're sort of reeling and seething through the power of nature and the gods. And that, of course, is sort of tragic and upsetting. But the other thing I found, which thrilled me, was this feeling of excitement in Ovid, this feeling of enormous energy. I did a series of pictures called Frenzies, where things are kind of whirling around in the air and one thing is turning into another thing. And I think a lot of my work is to do with, well, we'll see these cells and particles and nuclei, these unseen fields of force and energy that underlie the world. And it's both frightening and exciting. And I found both these things in the work of Ovid.
And in fact, I haven't got images of these because we didn't talking about this, but at the very beginning of lockdown, you were doing another series of drawings relating to Ovid.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did a book with words on a sort of sketchbook, really, with a picture and then words underneath, actual extracts from Ovid, not exactly illustrated, but sort of going with pictures, that because I tend to use poetry as a springboard. I don't want to just illustrate in a slavish kind of plodding way. I just get something from it and then off I go at a tangent and think that poem has made this picture.
Yeah. Okay, before
Can't
we
hear you, Anna.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little bit stuttery.
Oh.
Oh.
Can you hear okay now?
No, I can hear you now. Fine.
Okay. Right.
So
before we get on, we will get onto the COVID pictures in a minute, but I just wanted to show a couple more slides highlighting again what you've just talked about, really. So your depiction of the unfamiliar, the mysterious, silhouettes, possibility, potential. There's some great, like, runny liquid acrylic here, and then also the obfuscation of figures, again using dark and light, and these hooded characters here, which again will recur in the COVID series. But what were these from? Who are these characters?
The one on the left was is a priest in St. Paul's Cathedral. I had a residency at St. Paul's, which Paul Stolper, who was on the committee at St. Paul's Art Committee, he organised that, and it was very thrilling because it was called "Here Comes Everybody," a reference to a phrase from Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. And it was everybody pouring through the cathedral, and I just did these. I sat on the floor or on a chair doing watercolour, and I did cleaners and priests and tourists and everybody. Here comes everybody. So that was a priest. And one in the middle is from the Andrew Marvell sequence, where he has these characters sort of hovering in gardens and woods at night and in blazing sunlight. And the one on the right is an Eliot one. It's called Heart of Light. Or it's called Garden, because I wasn't allowed to use exact quotes in the book. Faber wouldn't allow it. There is a passage in The Wasteland where he talks about looking into the heart of light, the silence. And it's this idea, as I talked about before, of light overwhelming the figure and almost obscuring it.
It's kind of bleached it out in that
one. Yeah, it's a very bleached picture.
Okay, so all of these themes are actually going to recur, but so we're now on to your current series, which is the COVID-19 doctors, nurses, wards. Can you tell me, these were the first 3 images, I think, or 3 of the first images. How did the whole idea or come about in the first instance?
Well, I have a collector friend who's a doctor called Peter Collins, who works in the Bristol and Western Hospital. He's a consultant hepatologist. I think that's kidney, I'm not sure, I think it's, or liver. Anyway, he had bought work of mine, astronauts and dining rooms, and he thought that the isolation, because he was, you know, he knew I did these isolated figures, the isolation of figures in PPE and in COVID wards would appeal to me, and the general sort of neon lit, slightly alien settings. And I said, well, yeah, good idea. And he sent me some photographs from his hospital, and I got started. And then I thought that they were very inspiring. They seemed to draw together a lot of ideas that I'd had before about the figure. And so, of course, I looked online and on watching the news, as we do all the time. And I got more images and have been working on those ever since, including today.
Really? So you started off, I mean, these 3 were actually from the images that Peter sent you. And then
it's not literally, but they were some of the first ones I did, and they were sort of inspired by what I saw that he'd sent me.
Okay, and then after that, you've been finding your own imagery, as you say, from various news media sources. So how has the series developed as you've gone along? Has anything changed? Have ideas developed? Have you picked out certain aspects that, you know, you want to forefront?
I think the contrast of the messy patient, I mean, I talked about mess and metamorphosis, and this feeling of the patient, who is on this bed with all these tubes and wires and in a terrible state, the contrast of the patient and the sort of high-tech, strange doctors who are almost like cyborgs or robots, and also hooded and veiled like my earlier figures, and the feeling of fear that I talked about at the beginning belongs to these, the feeling of people who are metamorphosed and changed by masks and goggles and hoods and specialized gear. It makes them frightening and peculiar. So the focus on these peculiar figures, who reminded me of pictures I'd seen of plague doctors. On my way to the studio, I used to pass this picture in Mile End Park of a plague doctor from, I think, the Middle Ages. Yeah, here we are on the right, which was always very frightening. Apparently that beak was used to have fragrant herbs in it to stop the smell. And then the pole was to lift up garments and see the infections underneath. Anyway, so these hoods and masks and the contrast between the doctors, who are sort of ambivalently both caring but also frightening, contrast between them and the messy patient. And then the other thing I sort of did was trying to imagine myself into this frightening situation. I kind of imagined myself on the bed as the patient, and I wanted to do the doctors coming towards me, or the nurses, and looming over me, and these sort of apparitions being very, very alarming. And then I read accounts by patients who'd survived of their sort of hallucinations and delusions when they were ill. And so I wanted to make the doctors or nurses, some of them I made into sort of ghostly phantoms and strange figures looming, coming in and out of focus. I was thinking of, from the patient's point of view again, of these figures being almost otherworldly, belonging to another world. And I was thinking of the bed that the patient was in being a bit like my beaches, this place between this world, this familiar world, and another world, death or some sort of strange mental processes in which one loses a sense of ordinary reality, and you become a victim of these frightening visions.
I mean, so these sort of give an idea of how, like, the viewpoint that you're using, which is quite extreme, of the doctors and nurses bearing down on you. And you talked about the fear, and the eyes here, you've like really simplified them just down to, like, I guess it's goggles, but they're almost just blank, dark holes. Is the fear, whose side is it on? Is it on the patient's side, or is it the doctors as well? Is it just the general mass fear?
Well, yes, I suppose you could say general mass. Certainly the patient's fear, but even though this may not be quite fair on the doctors, maybe they don't feel fear. But I think I have, when I've been glued to the news, I have heard doctors and nurses speak of feeling overwhelmed and devastated and full of grief at what they've had to witness and cope with. And so the goggles, whatever the figure is feeling behind them, express, for me at any rate, a feeling of kind of helplessness and wide-eyed wonder and horror, really, at what is going on in front of them. So, yeah, I'm afraid a generalized fear, really.
Well, I think that's it captures the feeling that everyone is experiencing at the moment. So it's very...
Yes, I think we're all, well, maybe some people aren't afraid. I've certainly been afraid.
Yeah. You've also, talking of being afraid, but I mean, it's not really to do with being afraid. You've been working from home on your kitchen table rather than going to a studio. How, if at all, has that changed or affected the way you're working or the medium you're working in?
Well, I've been very lucky to be sort of shut up at home. Well, I have been out a bit, but I tried to go to the studio, but I was scared of the joggers being too near me, panting and so on. Being at home has affected me in, I suppose, but it's made me work small, but then I do that anyway. And it's made me use things that were to hand, like cardboard, because of the heroic delivery people. We've had a lot of boxes of vegetables and things. So waste not, want not, I've used the boxes to paint on. And then I found other things at home, pencils and coloured pencils, sets of pastels I hadn't been using. And so I've kind of, I've got stuff from the studio, but I also made do with things I found lying at home. And so, yeah, I just got on with it. I quite enjoyed really working in this subterranean kitchen. Makes it strange.
And when you say you work small scale, can you give us an idea of sort of what size would these images be, for example?
They're about 28 by 38 centimetres.
Okay, so yeah.
Some are A4, some are A3, that sort of scale. A few cardboard ones are bigger, but then I found some scraps of cardboard and thought, well, I'll use that, and some of them have been smaller.
Okay, so it's pretty much just make do mend.
Yeah, well, and I have pads of proper paper. They are on, watercolor paper or acrylic paper, but certainly the cardboard is using, although I have used cardboard before, but I wanted to use what I'd got.
Yeah.
From deliverers.
So you've mentioned the plague doctor image, but are you also, I mean, it would be hard to imagine that you're not bringing in other literary influences or perhaps art historical influences somewhere as well along the way, given that that's kind of what you do.
Yeah. Well, yes, I think Bosch obviously was a painter I love, Bosch and Bruegel, because Bosch uses, for instance, The Temptation of St. Anthony or The Last Judgment, is it? He uses these hooded figures. And then I think there was the nativity scenes influenced me, where there's one by Guido Reni in the National Gallery, where, I mean, it sounds a bit impertinent, but it's to say, because my work's so, it's not like it at all, obviously, but in these nativity scenes, the light is coming from the Jesus figure, the baby. And I quite like this radiance coming from the middle, because I've, you know, I've gone on a lot about the doctors being frightening and robotic or whatever, but they can also appear quite angelic and sometimes light, which, as I've said, can be a destructive thing, can be a very positive and beautiful thing. And some of my doctors kind of are involved in an operation in which light is radiating from the center. So nativity scenes and Bosch, oh yeah, and another painting that influenced me was by Frans Hals, a painting called The Regentesses of the Old Men's Almshouse. And it's these other stone figures gathered around in a particular formation. They're not gathered around a bed, but I used them for a picture, which I think you may have somewhere called Bedside. Where you get this strange mess of the patient and then these figures gathered around it.
See, this one made me, this might just be me reading things in, but it made me think of Philip Guston.
Oh, right, the Klansman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't really aware of him, but certainly, yes, there's the Klansman. That makes the doctors even more ambivalent. far from angelic.
Yeah, it's probably, your reading is probably obviously more accurate than mine, but, and that, I mean, that patient there is really quite terrifying as messes go.
Yes, it's really disintegrating and decomposing, and it seems to be in a situation, on a borderline situation, a liminal place between this world and another. I suppose Metamorphosis could be said to be about the fear of death and changing into, I remember being gripped when I was young, going to church, St. Paul's Corinthians lesson saying, and we shall all be changed in the twinkling of an eye. And I thought, anyway, yeah, the patient is frightening. That shape to me is frightening.
And the patients aren't from real images. You're putting those in yourself.
Well, they are partly. I've sort of taken liberties with the patient and used my propensity for making mess with the patient image. But I've seen some and read some terrible descriptions. A doctor called Dr. Rachel Clark writes about the patient being this mess of tubes and wires. And I've seen this kind of, these strange amalgams of science, high tech, and nature, of flesh and metal and plastic. And I suppose there is that contrast in these pictures of science and nature, of high tech and raw flesh.
Yeah. And
you say literature, yeah, I mean, I suppose monstrous figures from Shakespeare, for example, from Midsummer Night's Dream. I won't dwell on this, but Midsummer Night's Dream, or The Tempest, or his metaphors of monstrousness have worked their way into these as well.
Yeah, they're all there inside your mind.
Right, they are, yeah.
Cardboard. You mentioned, like, so these are two of your beach scenes, and you've mentioned these earlier, but also in relation to the current series, but also just the like, if you look at the skies, those look like viral elements somehow. I mean, was that, I don't know when you painted these, how long ago was it?
About 2003, ages ago.
So way before any of this happened, but were you actually thinking of virus?
I was actually, I must be a clairvoyant. I was thinking of that, but because with my Andrew Marvell work, and also a series which we haven't got here called Mutilates, which were white figures on black backgrounds, which were semi-translucent, and you could see through the skin into the kind of nerves and tendrils and tendons and muscles of a figure. They were like x-rays. And in these, there were these cells and parts of the body, including viruses. And so I was always interested in this scientific aspect and bringing this unseen, minuscule aspect into my painting. And then in the Andrew Marvell pictures, Marvell, writes about microscopy. He's 17th century, but microscopy was in its infancy. And in my pictures of his poems, I blew up these cells, and so they floated near figures. So I continued with this in the beach pictures as a sort of threat hanging over figures, but also, as I said before, this sense of energy and this field of life, the force that through the green fuse drives the flower, as Dylan Thomas wrote. All these aspects of nature that we can't see, but that are kind of that are full of energy. Yeah. So it's kind of energy as well as threat. And yeah, I did definitely see them as something viral hanging over these hedonistic figures who don't know what's going to hit them.
Yeah, obliviously lying there on the sand. And you've also got them in your dining room series here.
Yeah, I did the two series in tandem, really. Interior dining rooms and then the beaches. And in these dining rooms, I suppose, the cells are a bit like, somebody said they're a bit like planets as well. It's as if they're in outer space. You don't quite know whether it's a huge cell, a cell magnified hugely, or it's some huge thing like a planet. But certainly, and this is what I mean about things made strange. It's a dining room scene, but it's also made strange with its colour and this outer space or scientific sphere hanging over it.
I mean, it does to me look like they're sitting dining outside rather than in a room. But
yes, I was thinking of them in this kind of infinite dining room inside, but paradoxically inside, but infinite. I don't know. They were done from photographs of a banquet, but they could be outside, of course.
So just to come back and finish really before we take questions with the COVID-19, some more images. I mean, these just really show the sense of overwhelm, which again carries over. I mean, it was perhaps more, it's different from in those images of the beaches in the dining room, but I mean, that's the crowds and the viral cells in the sky, that's very overwhelming. But here it is just, as you said several times, the strangeness, the masks, the otherness, the alienness. And here you've got the light again. It's that kind of angelic light maybe that you were referring to. I don't know.
Yes.
I mean, what do you hope will happen to this series? I mean, it must be an immense series now because you have been working on it every day. What do you hope will happen to it when finally the pandemic is over?
A lot have gone. Paul has sold quite a number of them. Okay. And then maybe, my lips are sealed, but maybe a museum may take some. It's a possibility, but we don't know yet. And then, I don't know, I might do a book like the Eliot book, and then I'll continue doing them in the studio. I was talking to Paul the other day about doing them on big paper as opposed to on canvas, but trying to change the scale, whether it's on paper or canvas. And I think, I think I'll go on doing them because I don't think they just relate to this terrible pandemic. I think they, they relate to other works of mine, and this thing about masks and hoods and veils and so on, and extreme and frightening or exacting situations. And like the beaches, as I said, the figure on the bed is this borderline between a known world and an unknown world. And the whole thing about light, that's for me is endless, and the different kinds of light can be explored. So I feel that there's an awful lot that I can do with it, actually. It's very difficult to find a subject that can encapsulate your desires and ideas, but I think for me this is one of them.
You don't think that once it's over you're just going to want to shut it off and move on?
No, I don't think so, because, well, I might do, but I think that it's to do with things other than the pandemic. I mean, it's to do with nature and science. It's to do with maybe the post-human, the figure. Are you there, Anna?
Yeah, sorry, I just stopped screening sharing. people could see you.
All right. Well, the post-human figure that's robotic or made of materials other than flesh and blood. It's got implications that go beyond the current pandemic. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I see that. And definitely in relation to the rest of your work, that totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it is. It's not just, going off on some completely new, into some completely new area. It does recapitulate ideas about masks and metamorphosis and mess and light and fear and the known and the strange and this world and another world, life and death.
All those great painterly themes.
Indeed.
Okay, well, I think now would be a good time to take questions. We have actually got some, which I'm going to try and read. Actually, one of them was from earlier on, and I'm not entirely sure which image it relates to. I missed it at the time, sorry. It's saying it would be interesting to hear Susie talk about the shadow that roots the figure to the landscape.
Yes, I did talk about the shadow a bit, but I'm not sure quite which aspect they want me to talk about it. The shadow visually roots the to recap, it roots the figure in space, obviously. It roots it firmly on the ground. And, oh, something's happening.
No, I'm trying to find an image that will help, sorry.
Yeah. And then, of course, if it's in sunlight, it places the figure in time. And so the figure with its shadow is an image of the figure in time. And for me, it's also an image of a figure expressing limit, that although it may be moving through space as it's moving through time, for me, it also expresses a certain melancholy, because wherever the figure is, it's here and now, it's in a certain place at a certain time. And an influence which I didn't mention because I thought it might get slightly out of hand was the influence of novels, French novels, existentialist novels, which, written around the same time as the Surrealists, are full of sunlit melancholy, like the Surrealists. And I thought about this, and I thought about the existentialist exhortation to act, to choose the right action. And the problem with choice is there's so many opportunities. And seeing the figure in shadow, with its shadow, the figure that's in one place at one time, having chosen to do one thing, expresses for me the sense of limitation, that whatever it chooses to do, wherever it chooses to be, it's excluded other possibilities. And I think that this was a terrible burden for Sartre, and indeed for T.S. Eliot, that, this problem of choice, what to do now or tomorrow, and how to choose how most productively to live, and the sense that whatever you choose to do, you're going to be feeling this limit of attitude. And this, for me, is kind of encapsulated in little through the figure with its shadow in sunlight. And it's the source of the melancholy that I see in the existential novels and in the surrealist paintings. It's kind of complicated, but that's how I feel about it.
I thought it was very well explained. We've got a couple more questions already, which I'm going to try and come through now. Just a reminder to everybody that if you do have a question, if you go to your chat box, which is in the middle bottom of the screen, you can type any questions in and I'll take them from there. But we've got one asking, saying, well, your new work is exceptional. Looking at some of the figures, I felt a sense of disorientation. The doctors appeared both comforting and alien. You managed to make me feel like I was coming out of or going under anaesthetic. Were you feeling any anxiety while painting them?
Yes, I was actually. I'm very glad thanks for that comment, and I'm glad you feel like that. And that ambivalence was certainly part of my feeling and my thought, that that they were comforting, or figures of comfort and help and healing, as well as figures of threat and possibly bringers of bad news. I mean, doctors and nurses can be frightening in that way. And I think they did actually make me feel anxious. They kept me awake doing these things. Haven't improved well, in a way, you know, they have helped me because I've had something to do and I could work, which was good, but they also made me frightened. And looking at all these photographs of the situation made me very frightened. And I like what you say about coming out of anaesthetic. Having had anaesthetics, I think that's quite accurate, because I mean, that blue doctor on the right here is sort of misted out face and things not being quite clear, being a bit drowsy and floaty. That was part of my thinking.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The next one is a bit more general again. So it's saying your work is very gestural, painterly, and that you often scrape and scratch over your work with hard drawn lines. And we've seen examples from the Shoppers, the Moroccan series, as well as some of the works from St. Paul's. The speed at which you work from life and the limited amount of material that you need, usually just a small plastic chair, paper and pencil and watercolours, makes each series almost performative. Are you aware of that?
Performative. Yes, I suppose I was aware of that when I did the St. Paul's series, that it was as if I only had a split second or a few seconds to do each picture before a figure would disappear. And it was in a way like a performance, because I had an audience there. But I know for me, even if there's no audience, I'm just doing it. I know that I've got to accomplish it in a very short space of time. And that sort of focuses me. I've got to really concentrate.
Okay, one more question. Your paintings take me to a dystopian sci-fi world. Has sci-fi literature or film inspired you at all?
Yes, I think it has. I think, for example, H.G. Wells has inspired me. And I'm just trying to think. 2001, I did a series. My astronauts came from 2001. And then around that time, I was also, I can't remember all the titles, looking at other space travel films. And I'm just trying to think, J.G. Ballard, and just trying to think about other examples. But certainly, I'm interested in humans mutating into the non-human, whether they become ghosts or apes or cyborgs or green men, so that the ambivalent figure, which is human but also slightly non-human, is kind of captivating. So definitely, yeah, sci-fi. Yeah. Yes.
Good questions here. In fact, it's pretty much past, but anyone has a last minute question, if you want to type it in now, give you 1 minute, counting down. Do you have anything final you want to add, Susie, that I've not asked you about?
I think you've asked a lot. I think it's been great. I don't know if I talked a lot about. No, I did. I talked about mess, didn't I?
Definitely talked about mess.
Metamorphosis. Yeah, no, I can't think of anything. Certainly nothing that I can encapsulate in a second.
Sorry, I'll give you a countdown. Yeah, well, we are now getting comments just saying thank you and very inspiring, interesting.
Well, thanks to everybody for coming. And I can't see people much, but can't see many faces on my screen, but I can, yeah.
I can see a whole load of names down the side. So
thanks to everybody for coming, and thank you, Anna, for excellent questions and for the image.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you very, very much indeed.
All right.
thank you to everyone who's joined us today via Zoom, and thank you to everyone who might be watching this later as a video. And of course, again, thank you to Hero and to Heatherleys for hosting this.
Do I see it on YouTube then, Anna? Is that the idea?
It will go up on the Heatherleys YouTube page, and it will then later go up on the Heatherleys school page as well. But we'll be posting links everywhere, so I'm sure we'll make sure it gets out, and we'll send it to you, and then you can send it out to everyone too. But finally, I just want to flag up that next Friday, the 19th of June, Justin Hibbs will be giving a talk about professional development relating to working with commercial and public galleries. And then I'll be back the week after that, so the 26th of June, in conversation with Graham Crowley. So do look out for event announcements and Zoom links, which will be on the Heatherley school page and also the Thomas Heatherley Facebook page. I have those web addresses along with Susie's website.
Oh, I know, Anna.
Yes?
Can you just say that Paul's website?
Yes, that's on there too. Susie's website, and also Paul Stolper Gallery website, the viewing room, which is online and which has Susie's COVID series on it currently, and you can therefore go and view it in much more relaxed pace than we've just whizzed you through it now. So yeah, thank you again to Susie and to everyone for being here, and a virtual round of applause, because this is where you'd normally be getting a huge one if it were live.
Thank you, Anna. Virtual clap back.
I can see people clapping, so
clap,
yeah.
Anna, clap.
I'm gonna very unceremoniously kick everyone out now, but thank you, and yeah.
Bye.